Traditionally, the planning is very focused on the economic part of the development. So economy is very important. So all the process of planning is focused on the economic growth. But simply there's more focus also start to begin more bio-regional planning. Economy is important. The cultural aspect of the people that live in the region also is important, but the ecological system of the region must be take care in consideration, and also social issues. Of course, in the planning, when we are doing planning, there's different levels, and we should take care from the more local to more global level. And one consideration in regional planning, we should avoid the arbitrary administrative divisions. We can think in example of Africa in the 19th century. The countries were designed in Europe for planners that was far away, with bad consequence during the 20th century. No, we divided tribes, people that was not linked before. So that is an extreme case of bad planning. So ideally, to make a delineation to have a region for planning, we should take care some factors. So the physical feature of that area, like watersheds, topography, soil, type of flora and fauna of the region, the socioeconomic requirements of the people, this is also important, their needs, and also their aspirations. And if our values are for economic decentralization, local planning is very essential for that. So we'll talk now about block level plan per se. This is a methodology that aims the socio-economic development of a region through decentralized planning. And there's a quote here that gives importance for the economic planning should be done from bottom to the top and not on the other way around. And we can think about the example of Soviet Union, where the planners was in Moscow and was planning for factories long some thousands kilometers away. Of course, that was a very inefficient system. So in this case, to be more practical, socioeconomic plans should be designed for specific small areas that we can call blocks. So we can call the socioeconomic units or SAMAJ that we can say that are regions that are selected in the maps for a collective effort to create a strong, self-sufficient and very resilient local economy. So we are planning very local in some specific areas. So we can say these socioeconomic units, we are talking about the regional level, and the block level is a part of this regional region inside, and we can say one of criteria is to have more or less 100,000 people living there, so the planning should be focused here. So the idea is to create solutions for the economic and social problems of the people living in the region in a way that they become very resilient on that area. What are the benefits of block level planning? What you can expect theoretically? Because we are talking in a very small area, so the planners can understand very well the problems of that area. And here, as was said before, local institutions can be and should be engaged in the process of planning uh, because they know very well what are the problems of the region and setting the priorities for development. Another thing that is good on this is because it's a small scale, so it will be easier to mobilize human and material resources for the plan that we want to promote. And at this level, we have a good chance of improve the living conditions of the people that live in that area. Okay, about the methodology itself. So broadly, you can say um, we do a data collection, and this data collection can be statistical, can be also contact with the stakeholders of the region and get some interviews. Then is done a data analysis, can be perform some SWOT analysis, and then in collaboration with the stakeholders, then we go for solutions, proposals for the improvement of the region, and then there will be a final report and disseminations of the conclusions. So when we say data collection, the first step, we are talking statistical data collection, and we can compare from national data, regional data, and our block level plan for comparing how is our situation with other regions around the block level area. We can go for a range of areas, since from populations to labor, to education, to industries, to the economy, and of course the natural resources. In our case also, we can go for the history of the place to understand better what is the conditions and why the data can be like that. And then also on this phase, we are involving the community through interviews to some institutions and or some leaders on that area. Okay, so about the region, so we are in Portugal, and Cova da Beira is in the central area of Portugal, near the Serra da Estrela Mountains. And our study it's with the three municipalities of this region, Belmonte, Covilhã, and Fundão. So this region total have almost 80,000 people living there, and this is meaning that 1.3 the density per square kilometer. So now I will present already some statistics that we collect, just for you to have a notion how is the region, what issues is here. So this is the graphic that shows the number of people living in the region since the 19th century until now. So you have the people living there. So we can see from the 19th century there was increase of population, and I will show some historic events that happened there. So there was some progress, and because one of the municipalities, one city, Covilhã, as was an industrial city with wool factories, there was an improve in number of people living there, and you can see since the 40s, 50s, there was reached a plateau, but since the 60s, you can see in the region the number of people is decreasing in a very steady way. So it starts in the 60s, that was a lot of immigration from Portugal for outside, or for the cities near the sea, the big cities. And you can see that this trend continuing with change in politics. So democracy was implemented in 74 in Portugal, then joined the European Union, then was the crisis of 2011, but for the region, the meaning was always decreasing the number of people living here in Cova da Beira. So you can see in the 60s was around 129,000 people living, and 2020, 79,000 people. So that was one of the issues. Now, this is the information about the young people, old people. You can see in the 60s, a lot of young people was living in this region, and after 50s and 60 years, you can see that this changed dramatically. So much less young people is living here, and the number of old people are increasing. Okay, so we have the information for male and female in the statistics. So one of the issues of the region is the aging of the population. So less young people are living here. Comparing with other regions of Portugal, we can show this aging index. And you can see on the right side, that's covered the Beira region, and then there's another regions of Portugal, and on the left, the average of the country. And you can see that's one of the oldest ratio between old people and young people. So aging here is a population, lack of young people living is another issue. From the economic perspective, employee, how people leave the job. In the 60s, you can see on the different municipalities that farming, agriculture was very important with huge percentage, especially in Belmonte and Fundão. In Covilhã was an exception on the region because a lot of the jobs was in industries. So that was happening in the 70s, in the 60s, sorry. So 2011, yeah, there's a big difference. You can see that in Covilhã, there was a lot of less people working in the industries. There was a lot of factories that was shut down in the process of open the markets. And you can see also the agriculture, also it's much more, it's less developed now. And there's a lot of increasing in the service sector. But this increase in the service sector also is aligned with the Portuguese economy. So we can see also here the purchasing capacity of the regions. So at the green on the top, we have the most richest regions, municipalities, sorry, of Portugal. And on the bottom of the graph, we can see the most poorest municipalities. And we can see where is the central region of Portugal, where is Cova da Beira, and the Cova da Beira region with average below the national numbers. And also, from the statistics that we collect, we can show, to confirm that the average monthly wage that people receive on their jobs on this region, you can see on your left side, Cova da Beira, comparing to different regions of the country and to the national statistics. So it's also much lower. So this was a part of collecting statistics. Now I will give the chance for Filipa to continue with the presentation.
So hello to all the participants. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. So yes, I'm going to talk more about the involvement of the stakeholders. And as Francisco said, we are in the first stage of the block level planning methodology, so it's data collection. it's very important to have this all statistical data to have a better understanding of the region, but we cannot forget the community. So for really understand and know more about the region, we need to talk with the community, with the people that are living, working, the leaders, the organizations and institutions in the field in Cova da Beira. So that's what we did. We started to identify who would be the stakeholders to be involved and try to have a representation of the different spheres of the community, the organizations that are of the government, the non-governmental organizations, the cultural companies, business cooperatives, etc., etc. So and then we went to do the interviews, so to have a personal face-to-face approach um, with the community. As Francisco said, it's something that we felt very important um, because with this face-to-face we can go deeper with the relationship with the community and try to understand better what is their understanding. So we made a script of an interview, um, but when we meet the community and the stakeholders, it was more an informal conversation that flows naturally, but we had these topics to talk about. So what were their feelings, were their perceptions of the main problems and needs? What are the potentialities and untapped resources of the region? What are the solutions that they envision for these problems? Which are the ideal scenarios and resources steps that we could take to reach an ideal situation for the region, and what they feel about the work between organizations or between the community, the institutions, if they are collaborating or they are not, and what would be their interest in participating in this regional development plan. So we share with them this idea, and now with this involvement, we tried to create a network, and we started with 15 stakeholders. And these stakeholders are from the municipalities. Now we have two of the three municipalities that are involved in this block level planning, the regional development plan. We also have the university. It's a very important institution in the region. So we have with us the economy department and also the rectory, exactly. Also business associations. We have two business associations, rural development associations that develop several projects in the region. We have the cooperatives, producers associations. We have a cultural association, different social and humanitarian institutions, and the Agency for Tourism Development of the region. So we try somehow to go to every spheres that could represent well the community. So from these interviews, when we approach what was the main problems, there are several problems that they were sharing with us. I'm just going to refer to or highlight just two or three, because the first one was the depopulation and the population aging, as Francisco was mentioning. So this is a problem that is not unique here in the region. It's something that is a challenge that Europe is facing, and specifically Eastern and Southern Europe. And this is something that all the community is feeling. This creating a vicious cycle when we have the youth that goes out for employment. So then we have a more aging population, the service and the low birth rate, and the services are closing, so there's no employment, and that's why the youth are going out. So this is creating this cycle. And this is happening here, and is the biggest problem, and many stakeholders says that is the one that is related to the others. But just to highlight that there are problems here that we cannot see in the statistics, like the second one, the lack of cooperation and strategic regional plan. This is something that we felt with the conversation with the stakeholders and the community, because we understood that there is a history of competitivity between municipalities here in this region, and this lack of cooperation, they feel they all know that exists, but they somehow want to go through that, don't know very well how, but they know that the cooperation is very important for the development. This cooperation can be also sharing infrastructures, sharing resources, things that can go better. And there is also the employment problem. And this is something interesting because somehow we can see here, so the stakeholders talk about the lack of employment opportunities, but at the other hand, if we, it depends of with who we are talking with. If we are talking with youth and some associations, they say that is a lack of employment opportunities. But if we talk with companies, they say there's a lack of labor force, so there's no people to work. And what we see is that in the region, we have a lack of employment that can fulfill the needs, the aspirations of the youth. So there's something, there is jobs, but not the ones that they want to. And that's why they are getting out. And the company says, we want to develop our business, but we don't have people that want to do this work. So somehow there's something here to develop. But there's a lot of other problems that they shared and went into details, but I think these ones are the ones more evident. And not only the problems they shared with us, they shared also what could be the potentialities or untapped resources in the region. And this region is very rich in many natural resources. The soil is very fertile for agriculture. There's a lot of water, a lot of natural beauty, the cultural heritage, and the university. So there's a lot of potential in this area. So for these potentialities, what the stakeholders shared more with us is, as I said, this agricultural potential that can be a lot more developed in the region, and with this also some selling some products with agricultural origin. But also the quality of life. Everyone feels that here there's a lot of quality of life, and this means not only the healthy environment and the close to nature, but also a life that is much more cheap than in the other areas of the country. So this could be something that we could talk about more to attract other people to this region. For example, here, to rent a house, it's like 8 or 9 times less than in cities. So there's also this, as I said, the natural and cultural heritage, the tourism, but also, here, okay. They also mentioned that there are very quality service in education, the social welfare, and also the health. So education, health, and social welfare, it's very good, have very good service in the region. And also this particular point that we can see in our country, Portugal, the cities that are in the coast, they are much more developed, and the problem that we are in the interior can be seen as a problem or as a potentiality. For example, the proximity to Spain, the Iberian centrality. So this is something that the stakeholders refers to. And now, okay. So regarding solutions, there's a lot of solutions that the stakeholders also mention. This is very interesting also because we feel that there's no lack of ideas for the region. The first ones that they mention, or most of them mention, it's the importance of investing in the innovation, marketing, and internationalization of the local products. As Francisco already mentioned, in the 60s was a very golden time for Cova da Beira region. So somehow the people feel that we have a lot of potential. We just need to work better in our products to sell them better, for them to have more results in the market. And also here, again, the solution that goes through cooperation between the local organizations and to create this joint strategy. It's interesting because it's also here the promotion of Cova da Beira brand. So it's something that the stakeholders feel that there are municipalities that are well developed. They have a strong brand of some products here, but the others are not. So somehow all the region lose with that. So if we can invest in Cova da Beira brands, this could be something very interesting. There's many other different solutions here. Just the tourism, again, it's one of those very important, but I would mention the attraction of investments, or to attract big companies to the region. So this is the solution that is a little bit more polemic, and some of them, or many of them, thinks it's a good idea to bring big companies to the region. And we have two big companies that came, and with that came more employment. But from what the others feel, it's that we are investing in that, and what we invest in that, we are not investing in the people that are already live here and the companies that are already living here. And because some of these companies, they promised a lot of jobs, like 1,000 of jobs, and we go and see it's already 3 years, but only 200 jobs were created, and we don't see that it's going to create much more. So this is a more polemic solution. But I'm going, okay, going further, and now just to share with you a few thoughts about this process that it was so much engaged with the community. And what we felt is very strong, that the community feels that they need to be the ones that take this solution in action and put in action these solutions. Because there are other development plans that ask the participation of the local communities, but this is completely different to have the construction of the solution with the participation of the local community, or to make the actions by them. They do all these changes. Other feeling and experience that we had, that it was really very important to have this personalized approach with these face-to-face interviews, because we felt other way, if we were going directly to a collective construction, many of the things that they shared with us were not being shared. They were very sincere and very detailed, And this, we think that is very, it was a very good moment for the process. Again, this cooperation versus competitiveness, I think it's something that is coming up from the community, that we still live in a system that it creates very competitiveness, but now they feel that this block, this creates a lot of blocks in the development. So the cooperation is a must here. And a need for autonomy. So this autonomy, in a way, that is the autonomy of decisions for the development of the region, that they don't want no longer that the decisions are made in a national, external way for this region. So it's autonomy in decisions and management of funds for the region. And at least they shared, yes, it's very important to create these joint strategies, these development plans, but we need to do this in a way that we respect and we value the individual characteristics of each municipality, of each village. So this is very important, and somehow they want to feel safety in that they are going to join a collective process, but this is respected. So for last, just sharing our next steps. So as Francisco already mentioned, and we were sharing with all of you, we did this data collection, first stage statistical data collection, and we involved the local community through these interviews. We are going now to the second phase of data analysis, where we are going to gather all the information that we gather from the interviews. We are going to review the statistical data, because one thing is the statistic, other thing is what the community feels. So to engage these two informations, and with the stakeholders, with the community, review the main problems, the needs, potentialities, opportunities. And then we are ready for the third step with the stakeholders, because we envision us, PRIP, as one of the stakeholders, just one as the others. We are going to formulate strategies, actions, policies at the block level. Of course, then we need to frame this strategy in a broader vision, in a regional and national vision. And at least we are going to make final reports, and we, as PRIP, we aim to do a block level planning manual, so to share our experience in the application of the methodology, and then the dissemination of this this experience. So for us, yes, that's it, our presentation, and thank you again for the opportunity for us to present.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We would love for folks to raise their hands and perhaps ask some questions of our presenters. Are there any immediate questions? So far, no questions, as far as I can tell. I am going to ask a couple of questions myself then. What kind of assistance, if any, other than the process that you've been applying to your region, what assistance of the community has kind of bought into what you're doing and has been inspired to perhaps join the process? Because it seems to be that as a stakeholder and making this plan, that you will develop your own momentum around these great ideas, and the community will be inspired to hopefully come join them and engage themselves in it as well. I'm going to try to unmute you.
I think it's, yes. I don't know exactly if I understood the question, Alex, but you were asking about the stakeholders, how they, can you repeat again? Sorry.
Certainly. I believe that your efforts very ambitious in that you're assisting with the development of a collective process for the whole region to come together and to think collectively about how to meet the region's needs, understand the issues regionally and not just separately. I was wondering to what extent you've already experienced some of the greater community become inspired to the process that you're doing, and perhaps begin to find ways to ally with you or to assist you directly or to join the efforts.
Yes, for sure. We had many moments where actually we felt sometimes that we were talking with some stakeholders that had already this inspiration, that they started something, but somehow because they were not in a collective process, so they were a little bit alone, they just don't get more motivation. So they felt a lot of the motivation that we can now gather a lot of stakeholders, and they shared with us that for them it was very important to have stakeholders from very different spheres of the community, because these plans usually are done by the political sphere in the municipalities or academic sphere. So the producers, the cultural associations, the cooperatives, many of them share those. So this is so important because until now we wanted to do something like that, but we were very alone because it's some kind of distance. So if we bring all this together, yes, and they give, many of them shared, so what I can give to this process. And many of them shared some experience, some studies, some resources that can provide, like places to do collective meetings. So yes, they were engaged, and I think many of them inspired. Of course, at the same time with this feeling of, wow, this is going to be a big process. So it's like hide the aspiration, but they felt inspired. So it was the same with us.
Great. Does anyone want to raise their hand and ask a question of our two presenters? Okay, I saw a hand raise. I'm not sure which order we have first, but I'm going to ask Dill Green. Go ahead, Dill.
Thanks. Hi, I'm just interested in what the basis is for you being able to carrying out this very thorough and presumably, slow and careful work. Is that some state funding? Is that self-driven? How do you support your work?
Okay, we applied for a grant through a foundation, and we presented the project, and it was approved. And we are now in the second year of the project. So that's why we can have the team to perform this research.
Okay, we have another question. Wolfgar.
Just curious what your time scale is to completion and when some action might start.
O nosso tempo, quando é que vamos acabar os estudos e quando é que vamos implementar.
Yes. So thank you for the question. Actually, there's a question that we don't know very well how to respond to that, because we are doing this approach that is very organic with the community. We hope that until the end of this year, we have already this whole process of having the collective creation of solutions and policies. And then the implementation depends of what is coming. So it's really open. It's really open to what is coming from the process. But we also know, because this is a collective process, that many times very unexpected situations come. So we don't know exactly if this, sometimes we do like a very tight calendar for our actions, and then the things are different in the way that we are dealing with a regional development. So this is the idea of having until the end of the year, and then depends of what are the solutions, but we are open to different scenarios.
Are there any final questions? We probably have time for one more question. Okay, no more questions. Perhaps we should wrap it just a couple minutes early. Thank you both so much for your time and for being here and sharing with us all. It's very interesting to see block level planning in action after having read about it for many years. It's a kind of an open-ended process to be determined, and to see the very careful steps. I think the manual that you plan to disseminate afterwards, which could allow other regions to replicate your process and your perhaps some of the insights and lessons you learn along the way, could be a very valuable thing. But thank you both.
Okay. Thank you, Ez. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Okay, we have a couple of logistics to go over. We, unfortunately, one of our speakers this afternoon had to drop out. Andre Barata had an unexpected issue and is unfortunately unable to join us today, but we are happy to have Matt Oppenheim fill in for him. Matt Oppenheim is a fellow of the Society for Applied Anthropology and an author of journal articles, book chapters and magazine articles on educational innovation, diversity, watersheds, ecological communities. He has an MA in Applied Anthropology and a PhD in Transformative Learning and Change. He is a transformative anthropologist, having assisted transformative community processes with the Maya in Guatemala, in public education and many nonprofits. And he has taught anthropology at several universities. His passion for watershed research and action began in 1991, first researching the Murray-Darling watershed of Australia, and then becoming a watershed educator in California. He was the founder of an ecological primary school in Australia, and is the author of To Color a Warrior, an ecological adventure novel. Currently, he is the director of the Blue Ridge Watershed Institute, an emerging watershed based educational project in the Upper French Broad watershed in Western North Carolina. Matt Oppenheim, welcome to the System Change Alliance conference once again. So good to have you, and it's been a while since I've seen you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you look really good. You look healthy, happy. It's great to see you and my other friends that I've met in this conference. It's really an amazing conference, and I'm very, very proud to be a part of it. Yeah, I feel very lucky. I think we all feel fortunate. So Ramesh, does he go by Roar or Ramesh?
Roar. Yeah.
Roar. Okay. Roar kind of woke me up at 10:30 last night. And it took a while to get my thoughts together. And he posed this question about sacred place. You know, how can we communicate? How can we experience? And also, how can we use a sacred place to work with socioeconomic regions? And my mind started digesting the idea. And so these ideas popped up and became my slide presentation. So I hope you'll enjoy it. I plan on us kind of stimulating a lot of feeling and experiences from your own life that will lead to a discussion about how we fuse the sacred with our local economy, that they're all it's part of the same system of protecting our aspirations and our spirituality. So let me share my screen. And it means so much to us if you show us what you look like. If you show yourself on the screen, we can see the actual people behind behind the screen, but I know there's reasons not to. You might be cooking lunch or anything. So share my screen. Let me enhance that. How does that look? Can you guys see my my screen sharing? Carolyn, do you have to do something?
No, everything's working.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's begin the sacred with the origins of the universe. This is a typical galaxy. And I'm gonna first argue that the sacred that we get in touch with pervades everything, pervades all of the universe, pervades all of consciousness. And it's actually a paradigm that we see traveling through nature, through our human evolution, through our human biological evolution, and into our communities. It's the same paradigm that started the universe that inspires us inside and our work with other people. So on the left, we have a galaxy. We can see in the middle this bright nucleus, radiating all of its power and energy out to the periphery. And both are interdependent, the nucleus and the periphery. On the right, we see a spider's web. And the same emanation, pervades all of nature. So we see the nucleus of the spider's web, where the spider kind of hangs out and eats its prey and goes hunting, and moves out to the periphery where it catches flies that are trapped in the web, or maybe a cricket if they're really lucky, and brings it back to the center. All biological entities, including human beings, rely on the center periphery concept. It's very basic, you'll understand it right away. With human beings, we have our homes, our houses, which is our center, right? Our sacred center. And then during our day, we go and travel out to the periphery to collect our paycheck, get food, see our friends, everything. So this is a real essence of life throughout the universe, and leads to sacred economics, which I'll explain in just a minute. So I challenge you to think, it is a very big theory with all biologists, evolutionary biologists, that applies to just about anything. When an ant leaves its ant mound, It goes out and collects things and brings it back to the ant colony. I challenge you to think of any entity that doesn't have this paradigm, right? Right. And human beings are certainly the same paradigm. Whoops. So it also resonates with sacred geometry, which I think you're all aware of, the Fibonacci sequence, in which we see the same paradigm radiating from the nucleus to the periphery, right? We see it everywhere. We see it in everything that is alive, you know, and many things that have been created. So this is, for me, the essence is that we have the center, the nucleus, and then the periphery that supports it. Now I'm going to show you a painting from Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. Many of you may not remember the Leakey family back in the 70s, who were really eager to discover human origins in Africa. They really wanted to prove it, that humans originated in Africa. So they found some Australopithecine, that's our ancient ancestors' bones, in this place called Olduvai Gorge. Well, the place that you are looking at is not just a imagined painting, it's a detailed depiction of a space at Olduvai Gorge, and that all these fossils were preserved because of volcanic ash, something like Pompeii, right? This ash fell over this huge habitat area, and when they dug through, they found these fossils of all these animals, and then our ancestors. And what we're seeing here is the creation of the center periphery concept in our human biological evolution. Okay, so the center is on the right. It's the old growth forest where people stay and sleep. A lot of early human beings slept in trees, and they eat there and they take care of their young. So that would be the center. And then they reach out to the periphery for their survival. They have a water source, animals and plants around the water source, and they do their hunting along the plains. And again, this picture was painted from archaeological evidence. So we see, even in the beginnings of our own evolution, our sociobiological evolution, that we radiate this center periphery concept. Here is a dear friend of mine. He's a shaman that I worked with and lived with in Guatemala. In Kachika language, the name of the shaman is Aji. That's the best I can pronounce it, Aji. Okay, I'm not doing it perfectly. His name is Domingo Solis, and you are seeing him start a Mayan blessing ceremony above ancient Lago Atitlan, Lake Atitlan, which is three volcanoes, three volcanic mountains centered in this lake, and about 25 villages that radiate around the lake. So I went on adventures with him to different sacred sites to do different blessing ceremonies. And what he told me, he said, look up into these mountains, you know, and you will see that there's a web of sacred caves around the mountain. You know, that if you actually could see at night their fires burning, you see this huge web of sacred sites that are bringing the creator to this whole ecology system. And he said, and I've heard other shamans say too, that just imagine a web of what radio waves, and the sacred caves are the antenna, right? And this creates this huge network of sacredness that surrounds the lake. And it's the same thing of the center periphery. Again, we have the nucleus of the sacredness in the lake, right? And then radiating around to all the sacredness in the mountain. And one really great leap that I can make with Domingo is my PhD dissertation was about a study of 19 villages around the lake. that developed the cooperative economy. So his mission was really to weave an economic system into this sacred web. I hope that makes sense. So the sacred web was the framework for developing a socioeconomic system. Caves are essential to the sacred. They're usually a portal into the world of the creator or other spirits, where shaman or people going through a ceremony can jump through the portal into the other world and then leave the cave into the outer world. So here's again the sacred nucleus. This actually cave is called Chichimoc. It's part of the Aztec spirituality or cosmology. And there are 7 separate caves within the cave. And those 7 groups represent 7 ethnic movements that came from the cave and spread around the land. So again, here's the center and periphery, the deep spiritual weaving their web. And these are all the Nahuatl speakers in current Mexico and Mesoamerica, all the different tribes. And this is actually, people say there's an actual cave there that you can go to. A lot of other people think it's mythical, but that may be the secret that the shamans keep in their work. And then up above, we see this Andean pilgrimage that's done every year, where thousands of Incans from throughout Peru, thousands and thousands come together to walk up to this very high sacred mountain. And I wish I had a good picture of this, but they actually dance the whole way. They dance and sing and play their flute and drums and instruments all the way up to the top. It's an amazing thing to watch. They're so full of spiritual energy and mysticism that energy carries them forward. At the top of the mountain, the elders continue to the top of the mountain that's snow covered and do this blessing ceremony to bless this whole region. Again, it's kind of a fiber of the sacred going everywhere. On the bottom are the 4 sacred mountains of the Navajo. And this is common to any indigenous cultures, that the mountains provide kind of a womb, kind of a protective circle that protects everything sacred within the mountain ranges. Here's my story of the sacred and the periphery. This is my little story. Okay, you see me I was both a cowboy and an Indian when I was 8 years old. I go roaming in the mountains to find the cowboys and the Indians. So that's represented in the photos there. But as I grew up, I started creating my own ritual routine. It wasn't something I thought about. It's something I felt deep inside. And I want you to think, as I describe my own ritual routine, I want you to think, and maybe we can talk later about what kind of ritual routines you did when you were very, very young. A lot of them, I'm sure, emerged from past lives or something that's very fundamental in our DNA. As you could see from the slide we had about evolution, there's something really fundamental in our DNA and in our social biology that is a ritual, a sacred ritual. So what are we looking at here? This is a depiction of my house, my suburban house near Los Angeles. And the red squiggly lines are something I did right when I felt like it. I would take kite string in a ball and run around the house, wrapping the whole house in kite string, wrapping the trees, the car, the house. And it really had a special meaning for me. It was like I was, developing a sacred container for my house. Of course, I couldn't express anything like that now. It just felt like something very deep within. And then would come the moment when I'd cut the string and it would all fall. And it was just a wonderful festival that I did just with myself. Here is the nucleus, right? We saw the periphery, here's the nucleus. This is something, that I actually did. What I would do is put a chair in the middle of our living room, and I would run around the chair faster and faster and faster, singing songs, again and again and again. And I would be like laughing, my family would be laughing, and it was just a huge time. And that was done in correlation with the strings on the outside. I hope you don't see me as being loony. I am a bit loony, sure. I'm influenced by the moon, but again, this is something that was essential for my life. And as those of you who dance kirtan realize that I was kind of doing my own dance interpretation of kirtan as I ran and ran around this chair. So that's my personal connection with the center and the periphery, the sacred and the peripheral around it. For me, for this transformation, we all become indigenous people. For example, the Maya have learned the same practices for 8,000 years, the same kind of agriculture and culture and everything. So this practice is so deeply etched into their minds. And for me, in my own experience, it really is essential that we're led by the indigenous, and especially in climate change and the things we do, not just planting trees, or the trees are great, and preserving water, but it's really essential that everything we do is tied to the deep secret. And I'm going to read you this. It's a quote from a book by a very famous linguist, Keith Basso, from the Western Apache. I think of that mountain called white rocks lie above in a compact cluster. Sorry, got to move you guys around a little bit so I can read it. I think of that mountain called white rocks lie above in a compact cluster as if it were my maternal grandmother. I recall stories of how it once was that at that mountain. The stories told us to me were like arrows. Elsewhere, hearing that mountain's name, I see it. Its name is like a picture. Stories go to work on you like arrows. Stories make you lie right. Stories make you replace yourself. I just love that quote. And I don't think there's much need to interpret it. It's just ecology, nature, the infinite is merged with your identity. Just by being in nature, you're seeing your own life. You're seeing your own life develop. So to me, that's a really great essence of the linguistics of place. Every culture, every indigenous culture has its own model or paradigm of this. Here on the right, we're seeing a Shinto shrine in Japan. And it's actually a gateway, right? A gateway from the peripheral or the mundane world into the sacred world of the sacred forest, right? So the shrine presents a ceremony where you're moving into the center from the periphery. And one thing really profound is that these shrines are rebuilt every 25 years. And you might think, well, how can they do that? How can they take this beautiful, wonderful ancient architecture, tear it down and replace it every 25 years? But by doing that, of course, they teach the young the same building techniques that have been passed down for hundreds of years. But they also recreate the sacred, right? Through building the shrine, through working with each other, through chanting, by putting their heart to their hands, which is obviously the essential thing we need to do to transform the planet, expressing our heart and our soul through our hands. What did we do here? Okay, so we're going to move. I think I've helped you embed this idea of the sacred over and over again, a little bit too much, right? The center and the periphery and how the sacred radiates. And now I'm going to talk about how the sacred is satisfied through socioeconomic change, through our socioeconomic life. And Prout, our socioeconomic theory, I think almost everyone knows about, is the means for ensuring the sacred in every spot on the planet. This is a painting of the Hawaiian notion of the sacred watershed. It's called the Awapuaha, and I'm not pronouncing it correctly. But the Awapuaha is an ancient system where from the top of the mountain, you have the old growth forest, and then you have human nurtured trees, then you have plantations and people living down in the marine, into the marine ecology. So this is something that is very, very sacred. There are sacred temples along this route, you know, and many sacred ceremonies and the sacredness of water. And look at this painting carefully because they have woven a complete economy into this watershed. You can see in the backward there are square, multi-story buildings, which is not my kind of ideal of a local economy society. Hopefully the buildings will be much more organic. Anyway, so it's a depiction of the sacred watershed, and that we can weave our full economic system into that, our industries, our cooperatives, you know, as a way to merge the sacred and the mundane. So here's a depiction I like of different forms of networks. On the left, we have a centralized network. In the middle, we have a decentralized network. And the right, we have a distributive network. And I wish we were all talking now, but I think intuitively, I think we know which one we're attracted to live within, which is healthier, which is more like a spider's web, which is healthier. On the left is what we have with our horrid capitalist and urban society. Around the world, there are 25 cities of 20 million people or more. For me, that's like the most degraded, you know, kind of planet we can create by doing that, because all of them, you can see that they're getting all the resources from far from the nucleus, right? A large city is not producing its own food, not producing its own clothing, not producing human relationship, but we get all our resources from around the world. That's a system that is, well, it is collapsing now, and it is going to collapse more and more. On the right, we have something like the Walmart system, which actually works pretty well, where you have different hubs where resources come in from the outside and they're redistributed throughout like a region. Of course, this again really doesn't recognize the organic nature of the system. In the middle, we have a decentralized system, which is really vibrant, which always restores itself, which always continues to replenish itself, where you have small nuclei radiating to smaller communities around it. So this is something that's very fundamental to any alternative economic system, that we don't rely on one center for all the resources, that the resources are shared throughout the region. And again, for me, it's another sacred model. It looks very much like the spider's web to me. All right. Now we're going to move into more of cooperative economics and the sacred. So I'm going to give you a guided visualization. I'm sorry my words are stumbling. I just put it together really fast. I hope it's okay. You'll tell me later if I'm doing okay. But now I'm going to take you guys on a guided visualization. Okay. I want you to breathe deeply in and out and close your eyes. And I want you to imagine the region that you're living in, the watershed, the region, the bioregion, however you call it. And I want you to look around it, you know, and feel all the nature, the forest, the water, the cities and everything. I want you to feel like you really are a part of this region. And I'm going to introduce these sacred economic principles of Prout and how they start to transform our lives into the sacred. First, I want you to imagine that all resources in the region are used for the fulfillment of people and animals in that region. Okay, just feel that. What you feel is you start feeling very calm and peaceful, right? That no outside entity is going to destroy your resources. It's not going to come in and tear down your mountains. It's not going to pollute your waters. Okay, just with this one economic principles, we start to feel calm, spiritual, closer relationships with everybody else. And just from doing that one change, we start feeling that all of our needs are being satisfied, right? We allow the trees to grow. We will allow the farms to develop. So it's an easy way to switch to take care of everyone's needs. And it's the natural system that goes out with that is the cooperative system, where people work in harmony, have really great relationships. In fact, you all know about Mondragon, and there was a study by an anthropologist who wrote about the cooperative relationship within the Mondragon community, that neighbors were like family members. They always shared with each other. It was like one community. So that's another sacred thing that happens when we work cooperatively. And again, we're developing a sacred flourishing ecology. You know, in this kind of system, as we saw with the Hawaiian system, everyone lives near water, lives near a pond or a marsh, which is really, really, developed this mystical energy and is everything that we need to create. And then we have the full range of technologies, cottage industries, and for me, the concept that we're creating is looking at the nucleus as a hub of genius. I mean, what I see happening is that instead of being forced to hunt and earn an income, we start achieving our potential, and this radiates to everyone. We become a family of like genius. And in my life, in my work, in my teaching, it's hard for me to say that I know someone who's not a genius. People are on their way to become a genius. And finally, well, I think my time's almost up. We see on the right, I've never seen a good image of an eco city. I've never seen one of something that I would imagine, but just imagine our Hawaiian watershed looking more like this, that everywhere is green, trees, farmland, water spreading everywhere. And then on the left is the city of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. Now it's painted in an Art Deco style, so it's very stylized and very industrial, but actually Tenochtitlan was a water, radiating city. In fact, people called it a flower civilization because flowers were everywhere, and the lords and ladies would sit for hours just smelling the flowers. So that's my talk. How's our time going, Carolyn or Alex?
You still have a few more minutes. You can still use 5 more minutes if you'd like.
Okay, well, I'm going to surrender that to the group because, and I think rather than answering questions, I want to hear what you felt, what you experienced through the things I've been talking about. Think about your youth and whatever you did and how that ties to the sacred, the games that you played, the dances that you did, and then think about our planet and the universe. And then think about society today and your experiences and what you see for the future. Let's just openly talk. If you could raise your hands when you want to talk, and Alex will call on you. And I apologize for my awkwardness. I felt pretty awkward through this talk. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Would anyone like to share a little bit about how they feel about the sacredness of their origins, the sacredness of their places that they came from, or, the personal feelings that may have arisen as a result of this sharing by Matt? Or to ask any questions?
I hope people are out there because we don't see that many people in person.
So we have one person raising their hand. Roar, would you like to unmute yourself? There you go.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Matt, for that presentation. I really enjoyed it, even though I came a little late. It really resonated with me very deeply because I grew up in Norway in the 50s and 60s in a household in a small village. And I was living in the same household with my grandparents and my parents. And we grew vegetables, fruits, berries, in the yard, and in the summer and in the fall especially, we were all together growing and harvesting. And then the produce from that in the form of apples and jams and preserves and all kinds of juices were stored in the basement. And we pretty much lived on that throughout the winter. And then my father went fishing, and the freezer was full of fish. And so it was a little homestead, even though we had, not even half an acre of land. And during that time, all of my neighbors pretty much lived like that. And then globalization set in. Yesterday, Helena talked about the global economy and free trade and so on. And very quickly, that decimated that whole self-sustaining local village economy within about 20 years, from in the 1970s through the 80s. And then, of course, I moved to the United States. And when I was coming back to Norway, visiting, one tree after another would be cut every year. There was a new tree that was cut down. And then finally, there were no trees. And now today, there's only a lawn. No vegetables are being grown by my family there. I hope they're not listening. But yeah, so it is a very sad thing to see. However, thankfully, about 10 years ago, or 12 or so, I moved to North Carolina, and I finally was able to build my own homestead and have a nice vegetable garden, and living in a community where there's an organic farm and so on, with my neighbors. So I feel a sense of homecoming living in this place. So as Helena talked about yesterday, this creation of a local economy through direct action is very, very important. But at the same time, we also need to fight the systemic oppression of the economic system, the corporate system as well. And that's why, of course, we have started System Change Alliance. So I just wanted to share that. That's been my story. And I feel a sense of thankfulness and sacredness for being able to grow my own food to some degree. But at the same time, there's a frustration that that lifestyle has disappeared to a large extent.
And my growing up represents that complete break. I mean, I was living in the suburbs with nothing being grown, no community, but I hungered deep inside for that. So, I'm doing the same thing now. I'm transitioning back to community.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Roar and Matt. We had a couple more hands raised. Brian McConnell, you put your hand down, but would you like to speak?
Well, I lowered my hand in part because I would only really reiterate what Roar had shared, and in relation to Matto, I too grew up during the 50s and 60s in Southern California, and just miles from Disneyland, actually in Anaheim. And yeah, my experience is similar in just with the focus on the future. Kind of unconsciously relinquishing a greater, deeper connection to my own soul, and the ontological realm, from the perspective of the worldview that I orient myself to this work of socioeconomic healing. Wholeness, that ontological reconnecting in a healthy and healing way with the realm of being, and not only individually but collectively as community members. And it just seems to me that that work is so challenging in that it does. Yesterday we were talking with Roar about the integration of theory and practice, and that for me the orienting foundation of the theory is an integration of ontological of the being realm and dimension with that of epistemological, which is the knowledge, and that I don't think many of us are especially aware of what we have available to us over recent decades with respect to resources, models, that is work that has been really good work that has just been, kind of unfolding in the last 35 years or so. So that it's not ontology, it's not, that realm and aspect of being in and of itself, although we that sacredness in that realm ultimately important to our health and well-being. So I'm very grateful for the presentation and being able to contribute. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brian. We have one other person who has their hand raised. Wolfgar, would you like to speak?
Yes. My story is very similar to Roar's, except it takes place in war-torn Germany in the 1940s. I grew up in a village which was more like a medieval village in the sense that most of the members of the village still were farmers who had gardens within the village, who kept their animals within the village, but who farmed the fields outside the village. The village was totally sustainable. My grandfather was a great gardener, and he basically, together with the village, got us through World War II without starvation. Going back today, unfortunately, most of the farmers are gone. There was one left over about 5 years ago, and most of the houses have been converted into upper income mansions for the financial district of Frankfurt. I then moved to Howard County, Maryland, which at the time was rural with a population of 45,000 in the year 1966. By the year 2000, it had grown to 250,000. I had to escape that, and I went to Vermont to seek a village kind life like I had in my childhood, and that's where I am right now. But I'd like to know from Matt, what is your opinion of Asheville, since that is in your neighborhood? Does that have a sense of place anymore?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the mountains, the forest, the Cherokee are all around us. I'll tell you the truth, after writing my book, The Watershed, it takes every second, every action, every thought to stay in that ontological space. So spending a lot of time in nature, in the water. I see Asheville, I'm still a youngster in Asheville, but I see many contradictory kind of things going on. The super development, and then the kind of new wave of young people is really exciting on one hand, but on the other hand, it feels a little bit superficial for me. I don't feel that deep movement like I did during the hippie days in Asheville. It's kind of like you get a little fleeting glimpse of it, right? But I mean, there's so much potential for synergy here. It's like a national climate change center. So I'm excited to be, part of that movement.
If I may just add a few things to what Matt said, because I also live in the Asheville area, outside of Asheville, 20 minutes outside. And as I mentioned yesterday during Helena's talk, there are hundreds of organic farms in the area and 30, 40 different farmers market. So there's a vital alternative farming and food economy going
Yeah.
on, and that I find very exciting. As a matter of fact, one of the young women that works with me here at the Prama Institute runs a farm with her partner, and they're young, and they did not grow up on a farm. They came from the city, and they are now moving out into the country, starting. They're actually buying their own farm. So that to me is very, very hopeful and very positive. But at the same time, as Matt is saying, Asheville as a city has become this hub of tourism and more hotels and so on and so forth, because now people want to come and see this alternative Disneyland. And within 5-6 years, it has become a very commercialized little city, which is nice and friendly and all that, but it has lost some of it. So that is the frustrating part: how to balance, these the activism and the concrete actions that people take with the onslaught of the corporate economy.
I also find that, we're also in a very conservative area, a lot of Trump supporters, still avid Trump supporters, et cetera, et cetera. But I've talked to many, many people who own their own land, and those conservative people want to get as much land and preserve as much land as possible to fight the onslaught of capitalism. So even though in some ways there are enemies, I think they're also our allies. Can I ask a question to the group? I really would like to have an open forum about this question. We have been, where we live, where we create, is moving towards a really wonderful community and environment. And it's so inspiring. But on the other hand, across the planet, we are in an apocalypse right now. You can't use any other word for it. And there's so many millions of people who have no water, no food, who are being slaughtered. And like the Uyghurs in China, which I'm sure you all know about, live in concentration camps. So maybe not now, and maybe in a future forum, how do we really become spiritual warriors, and stand up? What are the avenues? What are the actions we can do to really stop this slaughter? It's something that really, really, I'd really like to talk about and develop. What kinds of actions can we do, to stop all this slaughter immediately? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know about stopping slaughter specifically, but let's take engaging with people that have nearly opposite opinions, or maybe antisocial, apathetic, not caring for others, not caring about the consequences of their actions. Encouraged by work of neuroscientist who deals with language, George Lakoff, here in the United States. And he says that one of the ways to break through to people of opposite values and perspectives is to activate the parts of their brain which are connected directly with empathy and connection. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that he does is to find folks where their hearts are, connect with them, not make them the adversaries and the enemies necessarily, but to connect with them in such a way that they share a vulnerable moment where they felt community and they felt a sense of responsibility, where they felt love and affection and family with another person, and that becomes kind of the seeds of a new framing for making a new relationship with others. And it's very hard to other somebody when you're in connection and relation with them. And so I think that that's kind of a first stepping stone. But
I know this is something we don't touch upon. It's kind of a nervous topic, but many people in this movement are nonviolent. They'll say, I will never use violence. It's impossible to use violence for transformative change. But I'd like to tell you really fast, because I know our time's ticking down, that I lived in a Mayan village in Guatemala that had just experienced absolute genocide. The soldiers and the civic patrol funded by the CIA would march into a village and slaughter everyone. And in another village, they would take the villagers and kill a family and say, we're going to slaughter you unless you slaughter this other village. So they actually brainwashed people into going over and slaughtering the other village. And I think if I was Mayan and part of a village, and I knew in the future that the militia was coming up to slaughter me, I would get as much ammunition as possible. And this is something that's very, doesn't feel very good for peace-loving activists like us. But I would have done anything I could have to arm that community, instead of letting them slaughter every member of their family. Maybe some of you radically disagree with me, but a lot of us are lucky enough to live in a very peaceful country where our families are not dying of starvation or being slaughtered.
Are there any last contributions that anyone wants to add? Any final thoughts or any comments to Matt directly?
I just raised my hand, Alex, somewhat in respect to Matto. I'm sorry, I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing his name correctly or not. I too came into the session late. It's interesting to me that just within the last 24 hours or so, that aspect of violence kind of became conscious in my conscious awareness. And I was a little surprised that where it came from, because there was something in one of yesterday's sessions that I recognized, I'm in a Western culture, and I was hearing and listening to others that were in, third world cultures and largely a nature and climate change creating conditions that were really far different for the most part from the conditions that I'm experiencing. And I too know the situation of village existence and life with respect to a totalitarian imposition on a global, on a global scale. And I think that's that too. So I found myself reflecting upon, because I too would identify primarily, kind of jokingly say I'm a lover more than I am a fighter. But given certain circumstances, as an actuality, I think that the community does. That's a very strong reason for community members to form, typically closer collaboration and affiliations, because those life and death, those aspects of life and death are much more immediate than they are kind of within my local community. And it's something, I find that people kind of, within my region, within my city, in working together, have blind spots that they don't recognize their privilege, and they don't recognize, quite frankly, that often they are kind of passively going along with with an authoritarian imposition. They're not consciously aware of it. They're just tools, kind of in the working of a centralized system that is neither healthy or happy, itself. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate kind of your resolve in putting that on the table. Those are hard realities. That's a hard actuality to address and acknowledge. Thanks.
Well, we are at time, and we'd like to really thank Matt Oppenheim, especially for stepping in on such short notice to fill in for our absent speaker. Matt, thank you so much on behalf of SCA, and I'm sure you're going to be welcome back many more times, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex, and for everybody. Thank you so much.
I have a couple of logistics before we get to our next speaker, which I neglected on the first round. We'd like to invite everyone to follow SCA's Systems Change Alliance on social media, such as Facebook. But sign up for the newsletter to receive news and updates and events from Systems Change movement, and to participate in the growing community by joining as a group or an individual member. If you would like to support the work as a volunteer or through donations, that would be fantastic. Please see the website for more information, systemschangealliance.org. So we have one more speaker today for the first session. James Killigan will be speaking about food and water carrying capacity in Portugal. James Killigan has been an analyst in the field of international economic development since 1975. From 1978 to 1984, he was a researcher and press secretary for the Independent Commission on International Development Issues, chaired by West German Chancellor Willy Brandt. Since then, Killigan has served as an advisor and writer for leaders, governments, and economic institutions in more than 50 countries. He is presently managing director of Economic Democracy Advocates, which promotes equitable and sustainable resource management. James, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ananta. I wonder if I would be able to share the screen.
Can you share video?
I'm not able to at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry, just bear with us for a couple of minutes. We'll fix this. Just a second.
Sure. While we're doing that, I just wanted to mention the last topic was very interesting. I came in about 10 or 15 minutes ago. The thing is that no doubt that climate change is going to be driving people to extremes in many ways, and they're going to be, and we're seeing signs of it already, that they will be defending their own turf in some ways, because there's a premium on resources across the world right now. The kind of work that I'm going to be introducing to you has to do with the need for a real rational discourse around resource sharing. And this is a way of developing information so that people can better understand the extent of the problems of measuring resources, the lack of resources that are happening in the area of food, water, and energy, or at least the decline in resources, that is. And so it's it will give people the basis for greater rational dialogue about how to distribute resources in a much more equitable way as we move forward. So I'm now able to share my screen. Thanks, folks, for working that out. And here we go. So I've really been looking forward to this for a long time. We began to plan this about a year and a half ago. I'm really delighted to be part of this conference. This presentation was prepared by the research team of Economic Democracy Advocates with assistance from Systems Change Alliance and Prout Research Institute of Portugal. For this study, we intended to focus on the Beiras e Serra da Estrela region, where the University of Beira Interior is located in Covia. But there were two complications. For one, we weren't able to measure the subregion directly in terms of water because the Beiras e Serra da Estrela subregion is part of 3 different watersheds in Portugal. And second, the EU political subregion of Beiras e Serra da Estrela, like the other political subregions outlined in black, do not cohere with the watersheds of Portugal, which are outlined in blue. Of course, you find this situation everywhere in the world. Political structures in a region diverge significantly from their natural bioregions. But it wasn't always this way. To consolidate economic trade in seaports and along rivers, political and economic units were once roughly aligned with the watersheds in many nations. But it has never been the goal of any nation to create political districts or regional markets to manage their bioregions within the constraints of ecology. But now, as populations grow and resources decline, and climate change is making socio-political economic conditions more fragile, the present administrative districts across the world are incapable of managing their bioregions. This must change. EDA is committed to studying political eco-districts because they conform fairly closely with the scale of our bioregions. Although we weren't able to focus exclusively on Beiras e Serra da Estrela, we have prepared a study of food and water sustainability in all of Portugal in terms of political districts and watersheds. Specifically, we want to know the extent to which each bioregion can sustain its supplies of food, water, and energy to support its human population. More broadly, we want to know how to organize society within a bioregion to enhance the equitability and sustainability within that region. Of course, there are various ways to define a bioregion. After a few years of research, we determined that watersheds align best with the relevant political districts, which could have some bearing on the management of the watershed. This is something that nations and corporations are not measuring today. By definition, an ecosystem is an area in which the organisms get their needs met from within that area. The carrying capacity of an ecosystem is a self-organizing principle between a species and its environment. We recognize this as an optimal condition in nature, the extent to which a bioregion can sustain its supplies of food, water, and energy to support human life. We're focused on human life. We recognize that life exists in many other forms. However, the focus of our study is on people. We start this study by looking at data in the 25 territorial districts or subregions of Portugal. These subregions were designated by the European Union in 2003 to collect statistical information and do not conform with Portugal's own administrative districts. Now, let's begin computing the carrying capacity of these 25 subregions. As populations grow and resources decline, as mentioned, we have to examine carrying capacity from this perspective. We begin with the population of each region. And there's no surprise here. The highly urbanized areas have the largest population, particularly Porto at 1.7 million and Lisboa at 2.9 million people. And next, we consider the population density of each subregion. As you can see, the northern and central regions in blue have more population per area, which also means that they have less arable land for growing agriculture. And here we can see that the southern and eastern subregions of Portugal in green have more arable land available for agriculture. This does not necessarily mean that these regions are more fertile. It simply means that the land area is larger in these regions than in the other regions. Thus, there is more arable land available for agriculture. And now we determine the amount of population that can be fed from the kilograms of food that are grown in each subregion. Here we see that the eastern and southern regions of Portugal, in green and dark green, can support more people with the kilograms of crops they produce than the regions to the northwest. Next, we determine the carrying capacity for food, which is the purpose of our study. Now, here's the rule of thumb. Subregions with percentages from 0 to 100 are within their carrying capacity, but those over 100% are beyond their carrying capacity. So on this map, the highly populated coastal areas in the Northwest are well over the percentage of carrying capacity for feeding their populations with the food they produce. For example, the Porto subregion in yellow on the map is 6 times greater than its carrying capacity to feed its people with the kilograms of food it produces. And the Lisboa region, portrayed in light green in the Southwest, is more than 3 times greater than its carrying capacity to supply people with the kilograms of food it produces. And by contrast, the low percentages of carrying capacity in the subregions of Eastern Portugal, portrayed in green and dark green, can easily support their populations with the kilograms of food they produce. Now, kilograms is a measure of the weight of food. What about kilocalories, the energy within food? We can see from this map that the eastern and southern subregions in Portugal, in orange and red, produce much higher amounts of kilocalories to meet the needs of their populations than the population along the northwestern coast. In the subregions of Alentejo in the south, shown in red and dark, shown in red and dark red, a much greater amount of people is being fed with locally grown kilocalories of food than in the subregions in the northwestern coast and interior of Portugal. As you might expect, the subregions in eastern Portugal are far under their percentage of carrying capacity in the kilocalories of food they need to support their populations through their own food production. But some of the metropolitan areas on the West Coast are well over their percentage of carrying capacity for consuming the food they produce. For example, the Porto subregion in yellow on the map is 4 times over its carrying capacity to feed its people with the kilocalories of food it produces. And the Lisboa area in gold on the map is more than twice its carrying capacity to supply people with regionally produced kilocalories. This brings us to water sustainability. We wanted to measure water in Portugal according to statistics from the European Union's NUTS 3 subregions, as we did for food. But this data does not appear to exist, or at least we couldn't locate it. So we conducted this analysis of water sustainability based on the water water basins or watersheds of Portugal, using data derived from the Portuguese government. This data is broken down into 8 watersheds. Now let's start collecting our variables for these watersheds to compute their carrying capacity and sufficiency to meet the water needs of the population in each region. We use population to begin. This slide shows the populations of the 8 major watersheds of Portugal. As you can see, the population density is greater in the Tejo e Ribeiras do Oeste watershed, shown in black. From there, the watershed populations taper off towards the north and south. Here is the total amount of water used in each of the watersheds. This is measured in billions of liters per year. The highest amount of water is used in Tejo e Ribeiras do Oeste watershed, shown in dark purple. The yearly amount of water used diminishes as you move toward the north or south. The Tejo e Ribeiras do Oeste watershed in dark green also has the greatest land area measured in square kilometers, as you can see here. And this map shows the billions of liters of rain that fall per year in each watershed. Of course, this measure is partly determined by the geographic expanse of each watershed. Once again, the Tejo e Ribeiras do Oeste watershed in dark blue has the highest precipitation per watershed. Notice that the amount of precipitation in the 2 watersheds portrayed in light blue at the northern tip of the coastline, Minho e Lima and Cavado, is greater than in the Algarve region on the Mediterranean coast to the south. This is a significant difference, even though the land mass of Algarve is larger than that of Minho y Lima and Cavado. Keep this in mind as we move ahead. Evapotranspiration measures the amount of water which returns to the atmosphere from the evaporation of surface water and the transpiration from plants. The amount of evaporation is greatest in Tejo y Ribeiras do Oeste watershed, shown in dark red, partly because of the size of the land area in which the rain falls. You can see that the precipitation diminishes as we move to the north or south. But notice that the evapotranspiration is greater in the southernmost watershed, Algarve, shown in white, than in the northern watersheds of Minho y Lima and Cavado, also shown in white, despite the fact that there is more precipitation falling in these northern watersheds. With low precipitation and high evapotranspiration, the Algarve watershed is at an extreme deficit for water. For a long while, this problem was addressed mainly by draining the aquifers below Algarve. Since 2000, however, this problem has been addressed by treating wastewater and piping it through Algarve. But the negative 260 billions of liters of total available water is not only an indication that the evapotranspiration from Algarve is greater than its precipitation. The negative number means that This is a long-term endemic condition of the watershed. It indicates that Algarve, which is known as the sunniest spot in Europe, will not be able to stop the process of aridification through wastewater recycling. Computations about how much water an individual needs per day vary widely. We use two different estimations for the amount of water involved for personal use in the watersheds of Portugal, which includes using water for drinking, bathing, washing dishes, and clothes and other household applications. Here is the lower estimate from the World Health Organization. It's based on the average individual use of 110 liters of water per person per day. The Tejo y Ribeiras do Oeste watershed, displayed in dark purple, uses 158 billions of liters of water per year for these individual uses. By contrast, the Algarve watershed on the Mediterranean coast uses 17 billion liters. Sado Imera to its north uses 14 billion liters, and the Minho y Lima watershed on the North Atlantic coast uses just 11 billion liters of its water for personal use. Guadiana in the southeast uses only 8 billion liters of its water for individual purposes. The higher estimation of the personal need for water is based on the individual use of 299 liters of water per person per day, which is indicated by the World Wildlife Fund. In this case, the Tejo y Ribeiras do Oeste watershed in dark purple uses 430 billion liters of water for personal uses, and the water usage of the rest of the Portugal watershed is similar to the lower estimate for the individual use of water per person per day, decreasing as you move north or south from Tejo y Ribeiras do Oeste. Now, what about the usage of water for all other purposes? For some reason, I am locked. I'm not able to move my my PowerPoint does not advance for some reason. Don't know what's happening. There we go. Okay. Not sure what happened there. Sorry. What about the usage of water for all other purposes than individual consumption? This includes the water that is used for industry, energy production, golf courses, and other things. Non-personal uses of water are also highest in Tejo y Ribeiras do Oeste watershed, shown in dark green, which uses 1,708 billions of liters of water per year. Non-personal use of water tapers off to the north and south. Notice that the water used in Algarve for industrial and other non-personal uses, 215 billion liters per year, is the lowest in Portugal. This indicates that water for personal use is a much greater priority than non-personal uses of water in Algarve. Now we come to computing carrying capacity for water, which is the purpose of this study. How many people can the water in each watershed support? The 7 watersheds in blue can easily support their populations with the water they produce because their supplies are renewable. Now see the negative number in Algarve. Algarve has a population of just 429,000, but the negative effect of the water deficit in Algarve is the equivalent of having 2.4 million people who do not have a local water supply from precipitation and must rely either on the recycling of wastewater, water desalination, or water obtained from outside the region to meet their personal needs for water. The negative number in Algarve is an indication that its water supply is non-renewable. How can we say this? This is the general concept. The calculations for carrying capacity express the relative availability of renewable resources like food and water. From our research, a negative number indicates that we are measuring resources that cannot be renewed within the watershed. And let's take this one step further. The percent of carrying capacity is arrived at by dividing the population of each watershed by its carrying capacity. Based on the individual need for 110 liters of water per person per day, the 7 watersheds in blue are well within their carrying capacity to support personal needs with the water produced in each watershed. They have an abundance of renewable water for their populations, but the negative 6.6% of Algarve indicates something different. It shows the degree to which the water in Algarve has become non-renewable. And here is the same calculation based on the need for 299 liters of water per person per day. Again, the 7 watersheds in blue are well within their carrying capacity to support personal needs with the water produced in each watershed. They have an abundance of renewable water for their populations, except for Algarve with a deficit of nearly 18%. Unlike the percentage of carrying capacity, which is focused on people, the percentage of water sufficiency is based on all uses of water except for personal use, measured in billions of liters per year. Most watersheds are within their sufficiency except for Sado y Mira, shown in bright red, which is at 146% of its sufficiency for all non-personal uses of water. Although Sado y Mira has exceeded its sufficiency, it still has access to renewable water through precipitation. But the negative number in Algarve is an expression of the non-renewability of water in this region. It's similar to figures that EDA has seen in parts of the American West and is indicative of the aridification that is now occurring in many places in the world. So our conclusions here are that, as in most countries, the political districts within Portugal are not aligned with their bioregions to optimize decision-making and planning to protect these bioregions. Also, the subregions of Portugal are within their carrying capacity for the kilograms and kilocalories of regionally produced food to meet the needs of their populations, except for the metropolitan centers, Porto and Lisboa. Porto is more than 600% and Lisboa is more than 300% above their carrying capacity to provide regionally produced kilograms of food for their people. Porto is more than 400% and Lisboa is more than 200% above their carrying capacity to provide regionally produced kilocalories of food to their people. Evapotranspiration is greater than precipitation in Algarve. All of the watersheds in Portugal, except for Algarve and Sado y Mira, are within their ability to provide water to meet personal needs and all other uses. In Algarve, the results for the sufficiency of water for personal use and for non-personal uses are negative. And this indicates that both its groundwater and surface water supplies are non-renewable. Contributors to the study are Roar Bionas, Dave Cunningham, Francisco Diniz, Patty Ellis, Grant Grover, James Kolb, Dorothy Myers, myself, Maya Strasia. And we want to thank you very much for having been here today and paying attention to the results of our study. I thank you so much for the opportunity to make this presentation to you.
Thank you so much, James. I wonder if we have some questions or if some people can raise their hands or put it in chat if you have any question for James about what's been presented today, or the methods that they use specifically, more about the research? We have one. Shri Veril, would you like to speak?
Good afternoon, evening, time of day to you all around the world. Hello, James. I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you for bringing that to us today. I'm curious if you have examples of how policy may have been influenced by your presentations on watersheds at a smaller scale. For just a little bit of background, I'm a watershed restoration manager and in charge of water quality and restoration in a small mid-coast watershed in Maine, and would very much like to understand how to apply this at a HUC 10 level, which is a hydrologic unit code watershed, which is smaller than those which were depicted in the country of Portugal.
Well, this is something that we're evolving. We have an organization that is doing just what you're talking about, but specifically, you're asking me for examples of studies that we've done that have influenced legislation. Is that what your question is?
No, because I had some idea about the legislation, but I was thinking about how can I take this concept and apply it locally? And I'll take anything you've got, whether it's an example or an idea.
Well, one way is that's exactly what the purpose of EDA is. We want to go into regions and help to train people in terms of identifying what their carrying capacity is, so that they can begin to advocate for a greater sustainability in their region, and also legislation that acknowledges the deficits in carrying capacity. So we're trying to work on two fronts. One is to educate the local advocacy groups, but also to begin to work on identifying the legislation that aligns with the objectives of those advocacy groups. So I don't know, unless you have a specific topic in mind. It's hard to address it in just a general way. I mean,
Sure.
if you want to focus on water or food, then we can take a specific topic, or energy. We could, look at something within those realms.
Okay, well, how about water quality? And
water quality is not something that we measure directly. We're measuring the carrying capacity of water to meet the needs of people in the region. So that's a little different topic.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not looking at the chemistry of the water. We're looking at how much water is available. We're kind of looking at that sort of construct. We measure people's need. We can get an estimate of what people's needs are for water in a region. And then we can also recognize what the availability of the water is. And then we're trying to understand how the availability meets people's needs. So it's kind of a supply and demand sort of thing.
Are there any other? Okay. PRI Portugal.
Yes, it's Filipa here, James from PRIP of Portugal.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering, so what would be your advice for Algarve area? So now we looked in your study, that's really the situation there for the carrying capacity in Algarve about the water. What would be your advice for that region?
It's interesting, it's not just Algarve, but it's also the conditions in is it Alentejo?
Yes, Alentejo, yes, also.
Alentejo above Algarve. The aridification is also happening there. It's not as widespread, but but here's what I mean. You could see Algarve as an isolated condition, but it seems that may not be the case. I mean, the problem is, our aridification is moving northward, and that sends off some, concerns. How does this occur? Well, once a region taps its aquifers, and then what are its other options? Well, you can use surface water. So what happens then when evapotranspiration is greater than the precipitation that's coming down? Science says that's not possible, at least not on a widespread scale. But climate change is making that possible. And now scientists are saying, we used to think that water was a renewable resource. Now we're wondering if that's really true, because we've noticed a lot of places where evapotranspiration is greater than precipitation. Other people will say, well, it all averages out across the planet. So no, in the long run, it's really precipitation is matching the evapotranspiration. But there are a lot of indications that is not happening. At least it looks like that may not be happening anymore. So that's a very serious concern, and Algarve is a place where that needs to be addressed. So places along the coast, like Algarve, have begun to use desalinization, which is a very good thing to do. But two problems there. One is it's very costly in terms of the energy that go into creating desalinization, and then number two, not everybody lives along the coastline and can draw on seawater. So those are two concerns. But still, when you're asking how the problem can be resolved, I think that from what I understand, folks in Algarve are really looking very closely at this, and they realize that and they have already realized it, and we saw it in the data, but I didn't make a major point of it. One of the things that we discovered was that the amount of water going in Algarve for personal use is much greater than it is for industry or for golf courses and other things like that, which would be more of a social use. And so that indicates that conservation is very keen right now in Algarve. Just based on the data alone, we can tell that, based on comparing Algarve with the other watersheds in Portugal, by comparing the individual uses for water and then all other uses of water. So conservation would be the other recommendation, in addition to the technology of evapotranspiration. The other thing is about moving water around. That's meaning using pipelines to bring it in from other areas. So what our studies are indicating, we're focused on the water that can be produced in a region to meet the needs of the population within that region. Sure, you can bring water in from other places, and we're not measuring that. And that's always possible. You can ship it in, bottles of water, whatever kind of form you want to bring it in. New pipelines, bringing water in. But what we're saying is that, look, in the end, we have to, you can bring people water, but that is not solving the problem of how to keep their own water renewable, and how to begin to mitigate the problem of non-renewability of water within your region. So I hope that gives you some indication of how severe the problem is. In general, I would say that where water is already trending toward being non-renewable, it will be nearly impossible to solve, because the idea of aridification already says this is more than a drought. This is a long-term climatic condition, which is going to take, hundreds of years or thousands of years to resolve, because by definition, it's moving toward a desert kind of condition. So, so in that sense, there's very little that can be done. Everything is just about adapting rather than really mitigating the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Very clear, your response.
We have two more hands raised. I believe Wolfgar is next.
Yes. Do non-personal uses include agricultural needs
Yes.
and nature's needs?
Yes, I'm sorry, I neglected to say that. Yeah, non-personal would include agriculture.
And also nature's needs, that's to say undeveloped land?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Roar also had a hand raised. Roar, would you like to speak?
Yes. Hi, James.
Hi, Roar.
Thank you so
Long
much.
time no see. Good to see you.
Yeah, and you still can't see me. Let's see if I can. No, I can't turn on the
There
camera.
you are.
Okay, yeah, there I am. So, yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Very detailed, and I know that a lot of work has gone into this. So I wanted to thank you so much for that, and thank all of the people in the EDA that has been part of this study and all the research. So going back to Algarve, in an area like that, as you said, which is similar to California in many ways because of the arid condition. Now, that area is also very popular and many people are moving there. It is the most popular place for people from Northern Europe to buy properties, and new development is happening and so on. So it seems to me that planning departments, city planning and so on, and economic development in general needs to use the kind of information that the EDA has provided here and take that into account. So I was wondering if you could address that issue.
Yeah, I agree. That's one area that we're trying to bring this information to those folks, but we also think that the information ought to go to also to average people, because they need to be able to know about this. If they're thinking about moving to another area, they should know in advance what the carrying capacity of that particular region that they want to go to is at the moment, and so that is one of the things that EDA, we're a startup. We've been in existence for about 4 years, and we are trying to raise the understanding among, as you say, policymakers and government people through, and particularly supporting particular legislation that is moving in this direction. But we also believe that this is something that really requires a lot of public education around, because people have a lot of misconceptions about, what climate change will do and what its implications will be in the future. One thing is clear. Some people say, well, there's not a great interest in climate change in terms of, there's a lot of climate denial going on. But the fact is that you can deny it in your head, but when the time comes that you need to make a change in your life because of climate change, then you begin to move into adaptation. So adaptation is something that human beings are very good at. And it makes it a little more palatable when you think that oh, well, I just have to adjust my life in some way. Either it means I move, or I eat different food, or I just change my my practices of developing, community-based agriculture, and getting involved more in terms of the greater sustainability of my own region, and trying to make a change there. All that stuff is ways that we can begin to address the problem. But I do think that the legislation that policymakers are looking at is key, because ultimately, whether or not you are politically oriented or not, we are all going to have to be making changes or decisions about the changes that are necessary in our environments over a period of time. So whether you see this as participatory democracy in making changes within your local community by getting together and taking direct part in political decisions, or you see it as something that's more regional, where you lobby your representative to make those changes, all of that is necessary at this point. So, we call it resource democracy, because it really does require that kind of approach, a democratic approach. However, my view is that one of the reasons we're seeing a rise in autocracies across the world is because of the resource crisis, because autocrats see this crisis looming. They can see the data, they know what's going on, and that, population's growing, non-renewable resources are declining, and then it means that there are, if people want to remain in power, then they're going to have to begin to control the situation, and then we're going to lose our freedom, we're going to lose equality, and all the things that democracy promotes. So one way or another, we are going to have to, one way or another, this is a political issue. We are going to have to make a greater attempt, either locally or regionally, to influence political decisions around how resources are managed in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. We might have time to squeeze in one more question. We're wrapping up in just a couple or 3 minutes. Anyone else have any parting thoughts or questions they'd like to pose to James? Okay, Shri Veril.
Hello again. I'm wondering I think it's been a couple of years now since the watershed restoration manager position was created, or from legislation in California. And I was wondering what updates you might, if you have any updates on that.
Okay, I think you're referring to legislation that we were supporting in California that would authorize the development of watershed managers across the state. And that was 2 years ago that we were supporting that legislation. That legislation didn't pass. And then during the election year, they didn't reintroduce the legislation. So we will see now next year if they reintroduce the legislation. But at the moment, that legislation had been tabled, and it hasn't really come back. But it will.
Yes.
The constituency there to make it happen. And the thing is, it was a political power play that turned it down. Both the Senate and the General Assembly in California supported it. And it was at the Appropriations Committee where one person had the power to shut it down, and he didn't allocate the money.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Well, speaking of coming back, we will be back in about 1 hour. We'll be starting up our second session of the day, which will go for 3 hours, starting at 18:30 UTC. Our first speaker will be Andre Vachist, speaking on the many languages of local economies. Then there will be a workshop by Ajna Lingbeck on big picture activism, a musical performance by Kate Pearl, and 3 crises, 1 major solution, a presentation by Francisco Ferreira. James Killigan, thank you so much. What an excellent presentation. And this is groundbreaking work that we all have a lot to learn from. I hope to hear much more of this in the future. And I'm sure we will as we begin to replicate what you've done with Portugal and in California, and giving us assistance here in Maine as well, and learn how to use this to make regions think about the sustainability of their natural resources and how to collectively think in those terms. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back in an hour.
Thank you all.